Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education from a school that you'll be proud to say you attended when you're 70 years old. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent. It is Thursday, April 11th, and welcome to episode number 63, Choosing the Right Prompt for Your Essay. In this week's news, 6 tips from college admissions pros on standing out. And we're in chapter 63 of 171 answers, and we're talking about how to choose the essay prompt for your personal essay. And this week's question asks how to calculate your child's grade point average when it is not listed on the transcript. And Mark is interviewing another student, Miss Anjean, a senior at Georgia State, in part 1 of how to know if you're on the right career path.
Anika, I thought that was kind of fun when we looked at those 8 regrets for the last 8 weeks. What'd you think?
Loved it.
So I think I want to stick with that theme and transition to a new topic. And this is going to be things that I know kind of we're both grateful for in relation to this podcast. And so I'm going to start us out with the first one and just get your thoughts. So I am super grateful for every one of our listeners that takes the time to send us an email and say, it could be anything. It could say, look, you made a mistake over here. Or it could say, I loved that interview you had. It's just nice to see that level of engagement. And I find it super motivating. What do you think?
I totally agree. But let me ask you, are we doing a countdown of these grateful items?
No, I wasn't going to do that because I'm not going to do the countdown because I'll probably keep thinking of more every week.
Oh, okay. You said theme. Okay.
I got a lot of them percolating in my head.
Right. I'm also grateful for all the awesome listeners. And I'm grateful for you, Mark, for responding to our listeners. Because as you know, you're the most engaging with them. And it's so exciting to see the conversations back and forth because you know I'm slammed. And thank you all for all the kind words.
Almost every time when we get a letter, like I'll call Anika at her lunch break or call after. Did you see what that person said? And it just makes this work all that much harder for you guys. So thank you for your engagement.
And thank you again.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, this week's article, Mark, is entitled 6 Tips from College Admissions Pros on Standing Out. And this is found in the US News and World Report by Miss Margaret Loftus. And it starts with college applications are on the rise and finding ways to differentiate yours can lead to positive admissions decisions. So this article, which was so good, by the way, starts by highlighting the experience of this young man who used his passion for theater to stand out and get accepted to Penn State. So long story short, what he did was he took it upon himself to stage his own productions because they were limited in resources, which of course is a compelling narrative for any admissions officers when they see that type of initiative. So the moral of that story was when students carve out their own opportunities, college notice. But Mark, I did notice that the tips that they go into is not necessarily about the creative talents, specific to the creative talents. These 6 tips, I guess, are not specific to creative talents that these young people can use. And you tell me how you want to rattle through these, but I'll go ahead and let you know, give you a heads up that I actually have questions on tip 1 and 4 that she gives.
Okay. So why don't we do this? Why don't you share with our listeners what the 6 tips are?
Okay.
And just list the ones that you don't have questions on. And then, or maybe you want to go through all 6 and then come back to the 2 you have questions on.
No, that's a good idea. I like that. Let me start with the ones I don't have questions on. So the first one would be getting a handle on the test. Of course, the standardized test that we've been talking about a lot.
We talked about tests a lot. So we're testing. I think we can skip on that one. Right?
A whole lot.
And I have to tell you, Anika, this one listener, right? So she used to write us a lot and then she kind of stopped. So I sent her a response back. And then she said, I kind of stopped listening to your show because you're talking about test scores so much and I have a younger kid. And I was like, well, we have 4 segments to every podcast. Just skip over one if you don't like it.
Don't forget the 4 segments, people. Don't forget it, please. We got to follow the book. We got to follow the book.
Don't get hung up in our titles. Our titles just focus on section 2, but we got a few other sections. So if you're not liking what you're hearing, that's what the skip button is for. Anyway, let's keep it moving.
Okay, so the second one, thinking outside of your school's extracurricular activities. So obviously getting engaged in other ways outside of what's happening just on your campus.
Yep.
The next one is do a social media check, because we recently talked about that, making sure that you are appropriate in social media. And showing up to the extent that you're available is the fourth tip that they give. And we talked about this, demonstrated interest, visiting campuses, filling out the information cards, all that good stuff. Mm-hmm. Now, the 2 tips that I want to dive into a little bit. So the first one is building on your academic strengths. Mm-hmm. And so what this is that, colleges are looking for students who are challenging themselves in college level courses, tackling honors, AP, IB, and all that stuff. But the reason why, what I want to ask you, Mark, is that a lot of you've told us before that a lot of this is geared toward these private institutions, the ones that do the holistic admissions. But do any public institutions look for rigor as well? And the reason why I ask that is because a lot of people call, now that they know that I work at my alma mater, they call me when their kids are interested, and they wonder about why they didn't get in or all this stuff. And I wonder about that. I was like, well, you got the numerical thing that formula that some schools do, where they just take your scores and they take, your test scores and your grade point average, and bam, either you're in or you're out. But I guess I want to confirm with you that even in public institutions, they also look at the type of rigor that your child is taking. It's not just about that you made A++ in like the most basic class. They do want to see that level of rigor on your transcript.
I'm really glad you asked this question, because it'll give me a chance to clarify something. So when we talk about admissions by the numbers, sometimes people call it, there's lots of names for it. That's what I call it, because it's simple, right? So you're crunching numbers. Some people call it grid admissions because it's like a grid, or a freshman index, or some people call it matrix. Is a matrix like an intersection of scores and grades? It's important to remember that for most schools that do that, it's not just test scores and grades. It's test scores, grades, and curriculum. So that gets into that whole thing is a school using a weighted GPA or an unweighted GPA, right? So there are some schools they're using an unweighted GPA, meaning they're not giving you bonus points for more advanced classes. Those schools are not necessarily looking at your rigor. It's just grades and scores. But even then, it's usually curriculum, because a lot of times they're still looking at math, science, English, history, and foreign language. They're looking at the 5 core or solid courses. But most schools are looking at rigor, because that's the harder courses, including your publics, especially your selective publics. And most states, your flagship school is your most selective school. And there can be other schools in the state publics that are also selective. So absolutely. And so they're absolutely looking at rigor. And also there are some public schools, Anika, that are doing holistic admissions. Like Georgia Tech is extremely holistic in their admissions. I mean, I've said that to Rick Clark many times. Like, you guys read a file just like the most picky public schools, private schools. UNC does a good job. So does UVA, and there are others. And then there are other schools that are what I call holistic light, where they're taking some components of holistic admissions. I would say the University of California system would do that. So I don't know. Did I answer your question or not?
No, yes, you did. And you shed a whole lot of light. I wasn't necessarily always thinking that way. So that's great. Thank you. Okay, so the next point and the last tip that they give is about the recommendations. Now, the tip literally is to consider recommendations carefully. And every time we've talked about this in the past, I knocked myself in the head, because I was like, why didn't I clarify this with Mark?
Okay.
How in the world do our kids know if these teachers are writing them bad recommendations? Mm-hmm. And I asked that because you would think that a teacher would flag a kid to say, you know what, I probably wouldn't be the best person for you to write. Or I just it's hard for me to grasp the concept that some teacher, professional person that's supposed to be trying to advance a child into the next level would write that child a bad recommendation and not let them know that.
That's a good question.
Because I've heard you say that they receive it on the other end. They say, okay, well, the teacher felt this X, Y, and Z about the student, but that student had no idea. So that's so unfair to me. How does that work? I mean, how can the students know how to avoid that?
Well, there's a lot to that question. So, first of all, most of the time students know whether or not a teacher feels enthusiastic about them. From my working with students, because I spend a lot of time with my students at KIPP as well as my private clients, talking to them about how to pick the right person to, for the recommendations. Normally, students do know that. So that's the first thing I'll say. And now, let's say you don't know that. You're not sure. And this is why the people that you're writing, I get asked to write recommendations. These are people you're supposed to have a relationship with. These are people, even if you're at a big, large public school, these are if you go to a teacher and say, I'd really love to talk to you and come in and talk to you after class or sometime in your office, teachers love that. They live for kids that do that. That's who they want to teach. You can get some time with the teacher if you want to. So you shouldn't be asking teachers that you have not spent any time with outside of class. And you should, most of the time, students can know when a teacher really likes them. So I really think that shouldn't be a mystery. But just to be sure, I always recommend that students, when they're approaching a teacher, they say to them, I want to ask you a question. I want you to be like gut-wrenchingly honest with me. And then you say, can you write an enthusiastic recommendation on my behalf? And if they hem, they haw, they break eye contact, they look at their paper, that's a sign that you bolt in a New York second and hit the door. Don't let you just because listen, it's also painful for teachers. First of all, you're asking them to do more work. And if they're not that excited about you, they're not going to want to do it either. So they will really subtly, they'll subtly say, maybe somebody could do a better one for you, or I'm extremely busy. I'll do it if I have to. But, you'd have to be pretty naive not to miss those signs. So now here's where it gets hard. It gets hard if you're not that kind of student that has anybody that can speak for you that way. Because now...
Right. You just took the words right out of my mouth, because that's exactly where I was going, was those kids that don't have those relationships with anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so the purpose of those people being there are supposed to be to uplift these kids. So
let me say this. Let me say this.
In that situation.
So the goal of a recommendation writer is to be honest. The goal of that recommendation writer, sure, you're an advocate for kids and you want what's best for kids, but I do training workshops in NICA for teachers on how to do recommendation, write letters. I do it every year. I do sessions. I gather the whole team together. I do this at KIPP in my day job, where what I do at KIPP. And I do recommendation writing workshops for them. And it's so liberating for me to tell them, because all of them, they come to me, they're like, oh my goodness, like, I'm so conflicted about writing a recommendation for this kid, and I just don't know what I can positively say on their behalf. And I don't want to throw them under the bus. So that's not something that teachers revel and relish in. They don't like to do that. That's not something they enjoy. So they find it very liberating when I tell them that I said, paint the picture with the warts. I said, however, I want you to be very, very careful of your language. If you're going to allude to something as an area for improvement, be very, very careful, because I've been around admissions committee and I've seen how one word takes a kid right into the denial pile, right? Inconsistent, lazy, like you can't, these words they're just death. So you have to, so I actually work with them in these workshops on how to find language that is both accurate, but is not too inflammatory.
We would like to thank every listener who has financially supported our show.
We want to make sure that our friends of the show know that you absolutely can make a one-time gift, or you can sign up for one of our monthly giving levels. Recently, we received a lovely letter from a college counselor who made a gift and said she wants to support the show quarterly, and that is also okay.
And if you make a one-time gift or a quarterly gift, you may still be entitled to the same benefits we extend to our monthly donors.
That's right. For a gift of $60 or more within the first 12 months, you'll get all the benefits we provide in our Sustainer plan. And a gift of $120 or more in the first 12 months, and you'll get all the benefits we offer in our Expander plan.
So to support the show, all you have to do is go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. Either click the monthly gift tab or the one-time gift tab.
And be sure to visit our frequently asked question page, which is also located at yourcollegeboundkid.com for more details. This is also where you can learn about the Sustainer Plan and the Enhancer Plan.
Your financial support helps us defray the sizable expenses that it takes to deliver all of this great content that is aimed to empower you and your family's college admissions journey.
Different people have different abilities to give, but whatever you can contribute will be greatly appreciated and it will allow us to remain commercial free. So thank you in advance.
Thank you.
But then the other thing that is what happens is you build a reputation with the schools that you work with as a place that the teachers tell the truth, and that's what builds trust. And when they know that a teacher will comment on an area for improvement, then it just enhances the compliments all that much more. What I used to hate around committee were schools that every single single student was the greatest thing since sliced bread. I hated that. And on several occasions, I reached out to schools that would send us kids like that, and I would say you're actually doing a disservice because you're not allowing the gradations to be evident from one kid to the next. If you make every single kid sound like I've never had a kid like this in my life, now I don't know who to advocate for, and I can't trust your words. So I'm getting a little bit too much into recommendations, and we got something coming up on recommendations, I think, in the next couple episodes, if I remember correctly. But is this helping you or is it confusing?
Yeah, no, it's helping me, but I'm still upset because what
have you upset about?
Well, because I mean, who would in good conscience write a letter on a child's behalf and put the word lazy or bum in there?
Well, I haven't seen bum, but I've seen lazy.
That child know. Well, I mean,
but from my experience, from my experience, teachers don't want to do that. Like they try to get out of that.
But they do it.
Well, so the ones that I'll tell you the ones that here's what I've seen. The ones that do it, some people, this in life, some people have the type of personality where they avoid conflict at all costs, right? So some people feel like they just can't get it within them to tell the student that, you probably would be better off asking somebody else. Like they just feel like they'll crush the kid doing that. Now, what tends to happen in most of those instances is they don't use that sort of inflammatory language. They just speak very dutifully and very blandly about the kid. And if you're talking about a highly selective or highly competitive school, it's not good enough to say this student is well behaved, they're on time, they work hard, they get along with others. Like that's not a good recommendation. For highly selective schools, right. They want to see that my class would not be the same when the student leaves. Other kids are getting a better education because of the kind of questions they ask. These are the kind of things, I went into teaching to teach kids like this. Like those are the kind of things. And at the most competitive schools, it's like, they want us things like this might be the most extraordinary student I've had in a decade, that kind of thing. So, but the point is, it's very evident when you're reading these, whether a student is enthusiastic about the student. It's very, very evident. But from my experience,
you mean whether the teacher?
I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry, I said that wrong. It's very evident whether the teacher is enthusiastic about the student. But from my experience, students usually they're rarely wrong when I'm doing brainstorming with them about who to ask for a recommendation. They're rarely wrong about who will be good. They know who they have relationships with. A student can tell if the teacher likes them most of the time. A student can tell if the teacher respects them. And sometimes there's comments that go home at certain schools. There's parent-teacher conferences. There's other indications. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
It is. And I don't, like you said, we got some stuff coming up on recommendations.
So one of them, when it talked about the first one you brought up about your building on your academic strengths, the one thing I really like, this is a quote in the article, the key is to plan ahead and start in the 8th or 9th grade to build a foundation that will open doors for advanced coursework later. I cannot tell you how important that is. So, for example, for a lot of selective schools, whether or not you get to calculus or not automatically is a huge factor in whether or not they will admit you. And so if you come in 9th grade in Algebra 1, and then whether your sequencing is Algebra 1, Algebra 2 geometry, or Algebra 2 geometry, Algebra 1 geometry, Algebra 2, every school is different, then the most you can get to is pre-calc. And so that's a big thing, right? And so, Karis, I don't think Karis would have gotten Davidson if she didn't immediately get on a track to get to calculus. And guess what? They weren't going to put her that in her private high school. I had to go in and talk to them. And so they put her in the next math. So getting on that course sequencing, which sometimes means taking courses over the summer, is a lot of things. It means making sure you're properly placed. And of course, this is only if you can handle it. This is not talking about pushing the kid that can't handle it, because I've seen that too, right? Where parents have heard that rigor matters, so they think their kid has to be in there. And I'm like, your kid's in there, but they're getting all C's. This is not helping you. Like, if you can't handle the rigor, like, don't be in there, and that's fine. Just build your college list accordingly. So that was one thing on that one that was important. We're not talking about the test point anymore. We're done with that one. Talked about that. I like this one a lot. Think outside your school's extracurriculars. This is kind of important. And so, and this one deals with more when some of your extracurricular contributions are outside of the school, not just in the school. And it comes through in your application in various places. Maybe your essay, maybe have an outside recommender write a recommendation on that. It tends to really make the impression that you really care about this and you're doing it not just in school, but out of school. So that one is good. And we already talked about the recommendation one, so we can leave that alone. The social media check, we talked about that recently, but there is a quote in here that I want to read. Admissions officers are savvier than ever in comparing your application persona versus your recommender's impression versus your online persona to see if they all match up. Now, I know we talked about that the other day, and you didn't like that because you're like, some people are fronting online and they should be able to do that. But just so you know, like, that is one thing. If your recommenders are making you sound a certain way, and when you're online looks like that's not the same person, that's a flag. That's a risk factor, whether Anika likes it or not. And then let's just leave the demonstrated interest one alone, because I know we're in episode 74. I think we're talking about that again. So let's leave that one alone to that episode.
Yep. Sounds good. Yep. 6 tips, y'all.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
We're in chapter 63 of a book I wrote called 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions. And we take a couple highlights from each chapter in this second part of our podcast, and comment on it. And so the name of this chapter is called How Do You Decide Which of the Essay Prompts You Should Choose for Your Personal Statement? Anika, you've read the chapter. What did you think?
I always think it's awesome, so you already know that. And I actually got a really big takeaway, but I don't want to talk about that yet, because I know we want to go. I know you want to run down some of the prompts that you provided, which I also appreciated. Oh my goodness. So you want to rattle those off? You want me to rattle them off? How you want to do this?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you rattle them off? But let's explain to our listeners who aren't familiar with them what they are. So what happens is the common application is accepted by over 800 colleges and growing. It's doubled like in the last 6 years, the number of colleges that take it. And every year there's like 40 to 50 new ones that come on board. And these colleges accept this as the main application. So you don't have to keep putting in your awards and your activities and your family and your curriculum and your test scores and all that stuff. And not to mention, date of birth and all the different stuff that you put in the application, emails, parent education, all that. And one thing they all accept is a common main essay, is 650 word main personal essay, which we've been discussing. And so what they do is they give you 7 choices. So you can pick from those 7 choices which essay you're going to write on. And that's what we're referring to as the prompts. And there's a competitor out there called the Coalition, which is basically also like a common application. But the number of schools using the Coalition, number of students using the Coalition is about 1/20th of those that are using the Common App. Or those are using the Common App. So that's why we focus on the Common App. Apologies to people in the University of Florida and some other places like Maryland and Washington. Those are all exclusive Coalition schools.
Oh, really?
So I know they're sitting here. If that's what your school, you're thinking, why doesn't you talk more about the Coalition? But we do have a chapter coming up about the Coalition. But for now, we're pretty much Common App focused when we talk about the main essays and things. So is that a good enough intro? And Nico, should I say more? Is that good?
Nope, I think that's cool.
All right. So why don't you share the prompts? And actually, I will give the statistical data, that's out there on the prompts.
Okay, but before we do that, Mark, for clarity's sake, so are you saying that these are going to be the same prompts every year? Like, how often do they switch out?
Oh, great question. Yeah, it's actually a great question. So, yeah, because my book came out like right at 2018, right? Like the Kindle version came out in the start of 2018, the paperback like December of 17. The prompts have not changed. So we've had another admission cycle since then. And they get announced actually usually mid-January, which is really nice because like I'm working with my juniors now on that will be 2020 applicants like Janaea on their personal essay because the prompts have already been announced. But here's the thing. So every year they may or may not change. You have to wait, right? And normally if they change, they normally like change one of them. They don't like change them wholesale. Like they may, like a few years ago, they added the topic of your choice one. That was something they copied from the coalition. That one wasn't there. But so normally they either keep them the same or they change one.
Okay. Cool beans. All right. So let me go ahead and tackle this first one. So the first prompt is that some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story.
Oh, and you don't like that one? But the question is, what does Janaea like? She's doing it, not you. Sorry. Unless you want to go back and apply to college again, you're more than welcome.
Well, I'm sure I'm going to be an editor of some sort. So I'm just saying.
Yes. Yeah, and you're a good editor. So listen, one thing I'll say is that 21% of students select that prompt. So I'll just share that data. I think people might find that interesting, right? So yeah.
Okay. All right. So the second one is that the lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure. How did it affect you, and what did you learn from the experience? Goodness gracious, Jalen, and in that darn trying to come up with an obstacle in life.
Yeah. So 21% of students pick this prompt, Anika. Same as the background one. Identical.
Interesting. All right. The third one is reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or an idea. What prompted your thinking, and what was the outcome?
That one is not selected by that many people. Take a guess how many?
Like 2%.
Oh, good guess. 3.
Oh, really?
You're good at guessing.
Oh, I was just trying to be funny.
Yeah. Well, you were funny, right?
I can see why though, because okay.
What, it just feels like it'd be a tougher essay to write on?
Yeah, it's just like, how do you not come across as, I don't know. I don't want to get into the weeds on that, but okay. Number 4, describe a problem you've solved or a problem you'd like to solve. It can be an intellectual challenge, a research query, no ethical dilemma, anything that is of personal importance, no matter the scale. Explain its significance to you and what steps you take, explain what steps you took or could be taken to identify a solution. I would pick this one. That would be mine.
You would? What is it about that one that you like?
It's just because you have your own theory and knowledge and passion about certain things, and it's just so easy to speak to when you're talking to something that you're really just like, you know what, this is just not right, and it's got to be this. I just feel like that'd be easier, honestly.
See, I knew you were unique because only 1 out of every 25 people picked this prompt.
Are you serious?
Yeah, 4% of the population, or 1 in 25. But you know what? I will say this. Sometimes when less people write on it, there's potential for it to be, less boring to the admission officer, right? Now, don't get me wrong.
That's what I'm thinking.
That's one reason I'm giving this data, but I don't want to get too caught up in the weeds on that. Let's make some comments about that later when we get through all 7.
Okay, cool beans. All right. So number 5, discuss an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and a new understanding of yourself and others. I feel like that's tough because kids, really, what have y'all really done to spark, personal growth? I don't know.
See, but we're different because I think personal growth doesn't have to be something that's just so monumental, right? There's a lot of things for personal growth. Like one of the students I'm working with right now, he lost 60 pounds. So that's potentially a really good essay.
I'm so glad you said that because you know what? I do tend to think that it has to be something monumental. So thank you for making that point, actually. Yeah.
Because 23% of people picked that. So almost 1 in 4 are choosing that essay.
Okay, that's awesome. All right, number 6, describe a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that it makes you lose all track of time. Goodness. Why does it captivate you? What or who do you turn to when you want to learn more? Wow. What's the percentage on that?
I'm not sure if I have that. Well, oh, yes, 5%. 5%. I sure do.
Really? Only 5%?
Yeah.
Okay. I wonder what those answers were. All right, and the final one, share an essay on a topic of your choice. It can be one you've already written or one that responds to a different prompt or one of your own design. Ill.
You like that or not like that?
I do not. Too vague.
Yeah, so that one is 23%. This is the one that they borrowed from the coalition. And this is the one that, because there were some students that were feeling, I don't agree with this, but they were feeling boxed in by all those choices. And they just wanted to write on what they wanted to write on. And so the coalition allowed that. And then, some students were doing the coalition instead. Because one thing I didn't say, Anika, is there are some schools that accept the coalition and the Common App.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
Yeah. And so sometimes you get a choice. And so the Common App lost a few people at the coalition. So what did they do? They borrowed and stole and said, we'll use that question too. All right. So what are your thoughts? So we've gone over the prompts. So what additional comments did you either glean from something I said in the chapter or anything else you want to comment on or ask about? What are your thoughts?
I'm going to tell you, my absolute biggest takeaway was your point about the brainstorming. Because first of all, I'll tell you right now, I don't do enough brainstorming in my own writing. I've acknowledged that over the last few months. And I show enough did not encourage Jalen to do a lot of brainstorming when he was writing. You're just in that mode of just write, get her done. Oh my God, just write. So that was my huge takeaway, actually. Getting ready for Janaea when she's getting ready for this exercise. Just brainstorm. Throw your ideas on paper. Brainstorm some more. Brainstorm with other people. I think that's even more insightful for me because it was like, you're always sitting there doing it by yourself, but you need to ask others who are familiar with you. And I wouldn't have thought to have them do that.
Yeah. And the one thing I want to say about that is it's really important that you do this self-reflection and this brainstorming before you start. Like that's your starting point. Your starting point is not look at the prompts. Which one of these prompts interests me? Then how do I come up with something that fits in the prompt? That's the wrong approach. The right approach is what message do I want to say to this admission office, right? What do I want them to know about me? What is it that I care about? Yeah. And so the brainstorming, it's so important that it is done as your first step. And too many students start with the prompts and then they try to straitjacket their answers into the prompts. Mm-hmm. And that is not the way, right? Like what you want to do is you want to figure out what is it that I want these admission counselors to know about me? All right. What is it? And what is it that I care about? Okay. And it could take many forms, right? So what is it I've been involved in that I care about that I can communicate? So you want them to know that so they know who you are and what you care about. And then once you figured that out, then you go back and look at the prompts and say, which one of these prompts will naturally allow me to tell the story that I was going to tell anyway. So it's almost like the prompts don't matter. They do matter in that you can't pick the facing adversity prompt if you're going to decide to talk about, how you challenged an idea, right? So you got to pick the right one, but in no way, shape, or form should they be driving the ship. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'm pretty confident that's the approach we took was we picked the prompt and worked ourselves into the prompt. So that makes perfect sense.
Well, that's what most people do. So don't feel bad. So Susan Tree, I interviewed about the personal essay. And one thing she said in talking with her, this wasn't on a recording, is she's like, Mark, a lot of times I don't even look at what the prompt is. I just go in and read. So that's why I say I don't want people to get caught up in the prompt and caught up in, the only 3% of this do this one, so I'll pick that one. That's allowing the prompt to drive the process too much. It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, this week's question, Mark, actually comes from multiple listeners, and they all want to know how to calculate their child's grade point average when it is not listed on the transcript.
Nika, do you ever get a question that you think it's easy, but it's hard?
All the time.
This is one of these questions, and it's also frustrating to people, and I get it, because like, first of all, who teaches someone how to calculate their GPA? It's not part of any curriculum. It's really not. Now, some high schools put it on their transcript, but a lot of them don't. And a recent survey of a bunch of admissions officers indicated that 72% of schools will recalculate a GPA. 28% will just take the GPA that's already provided by the school if they, assuming they provide one. And so the reason why this question is complicated is, first of all, what is the mindset of the student? Is the student asking the question because, let's say, they've read that school XYZ that they're interested in has an average GPA of 3.5, right? Let's just say they read that in some guidebook, right? And they're kind of wondering, well, gee, how do I stack up at the 3.5? I don't actually know. So if that's the reason they're asking it, the question is hard. And any idea why I say it's hard?
Not yet.
Well, the reason is because there's so many different recalculation models. It's not like, well, everybody that recalculates just uses this one particular way of recalculating. So there are at least 10 ways I know of that schools that recalculate. Now, listen.
When you say the schools, you're talking about the colleges, the way they
Correct. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, the colleges recalculate. Now, listen. You'll be pulling your hairs out if you try to go figure out how every school on your list recalculates. You'll be taking your nice blonde, brown, or black hair, and you'll be turning it gray. So I mean, I'm kind of like nerdy geeky on this admission stuff, and I'm in the weeds, but I never, for my own kids or for anybody I've ever worked on, tried or attempted to figure out how every single school recalculated their GPA. So I think this is interesting information. But it's not information that I want people to feel like, oh, I need to now go figure out how to recalculate a GPA, right? So I just want to put that out there. So, but let me share a couple of ways people do recalculate GPAs. I think some of our listeners will find it interesting. So one of the ways is to add an extra point okay. First of all, there are lots of different GPA. Let me take a step back. There are lots of different scales for GPAs. And one of the reasons why schools recalculate is, while the most common scale is what we hear, a 4.0 scale. A is a 4, B is a 3, C is a 2, D is a 1, F is a 0. That's the most common way. There's lots of models, right? There's 1 through 9, 1 through 11, 1 through 6. There's models where low is high. There's models where high is high. High is high. What I mean by low is high, the lower the number, the better. The higher the number, the better. Just this year alone in NICA, I'm working with a bunch of students that have a bunch of different methods other than the 4.0. So one reason they have to recalculate is so that everybody's on the same scale. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
But other reasons why they recalculate is because, remember how you asked a question very recently? You asked, in admissions by the numbers, is it taking rigorous classes into consideration? And I said, most of the time it is. It's what we call a weighted GPA, where you give more bonus points for advanced classes. The question is, how much weight are you giving? And the answer is, it depends on the school. So one model is, if you took an IB or an AP class, we're going to add 1 full point to the GPA. That's on a 4.0 model. And by the way, most of the time when schools do recalculate, they do recalculate to a 4.0 GPA. Another model is, this is very common. We're only going to recalculate core. What do I mean by recalculating core, Anika?
Just not all like the elective classes, the history, math, whatever those core courses are.
I want you to know what the 5 cores are. What are they? I expect you to know that by now. This is episode 63. Yes, this is one of those foundational things that you need to know.
I've been working on a lot of stuff. Okay.
No excuses.
English, math,
yes,
history,
science, yes,
and foreign language.
Thank you. See, you're just playing dumb over there. You knew it. You had it in your back pocket. I knew you knew it. All right. So recalculating based off of the core classes, that's a really common model. Some schools will give the same amount of weight to an IB or an AP or a dual enrollment. Some schools give it the same amount of weight to IB, AP, dual enrollment, and honors. At least one school I know of gives 0.25 for an honors, 0.5 for an AP, And they see IB as being more rigorous than AP, so they give 0.75 for an IB. Mm-hmm. You see, so you see all these different models. There's one school I know of that will add one elective plus core into their calculations. There's one that looks at art electives, but they don't look at other electives because they want to elevate art. So the point is there's lots of recalculation models. So when somebody asks what my GPA is, and they're attempting to do that to figure out if their GPA lines up with some average GPA that they see in some guidebook or on the internet, that's all but impossible if a school's recalculating.
Okay.
In fact, Emory University, a highly selective university right here in Atlanta, a school that does an incredible job of holistically reading an admissions application with all of the nuance. Because it is so complex to recalculate a GPA with so many different high school grading scales out there, and with so many schools not reporting a GPA, what Emory and many other schools do is they hire multiple full-time pre-readers whose entire job is to recalculate each student's GPA and to record their senior year courses. Let me repeat that. They hire multiple full-time pre-readers whose entire job is to recalculate each student's GPA and to record their senior year of courses. Now, the reason they record the senior year course schedule is because the rigor of the courses you take in your senior year matters a lot to selective colleges. However, if they're just asked to provide what is your GPA, or if it's a scholarship application, then it's a lot more manageable. Then we've got a fairly accepted within the profession that this is what you would use in that case. You would use the 4.0 model, and what you would do is let's assume that it is a model where 90 is an A and 80 is a B, 70 is a C, 60 is a D, right? Mm-hmm. So what you would do is anything that is a plus, meaning like B plus, okay, C plus, D plus, let's not get any lower. Okay. Okay. If it's a plus, then it gets like 0.3. So if we're looking at a B plus, that would be a 3.3.
Okay.
Okay. And a B plus off that scale would be 87 through 89 would be considered a B plus. 83 through 86 would be a standard B. And that would be what on a scale, Anika? Standard B.
3.
Yep. See, I was just making sure you weren't snoozing on me over there. You were following. I knew you knew the answer.
Oh, but let me tell you how I was just about to ask her. You are putting this in the show notes, right?
Yeah. No, we are. We have to do this. I'm going to put a link to this so people can see, because I know we're kind of getting into the weeds. All right. Mm-hmm. And then a minus is like so a B minus would be a 2.7. All right. I know we could do this. I just use B as an example. So then what you do is you add up all of your classes, right? You add up all of your classes and you figure out what the numerical number is that class gets assigned. And then you just divide the total number by the total number of classes. And you do it on a per semester basis, or whatever your school is reporting on their transcript. So some schools actually only report final grades on their transcript. Then you would just use the final grade. Trimester schools may have 3 terms on their transcript. Then you would use 3 different sets of grades per year. And most schools are semester. So most schools are semester. So that's how it works. And you divide it all up and you get a number. Now that's
where it can get, but Mark, I feel like that's where it gets dangerous. And can I just stop and ask this question? What's up with these schools that are not listing it on the transcripts? Like, why are they making that step unavailable? Like,
so I want to answer that because it's an important question. But let me just finish this off a little bit more, because I feel like it'd be more confusing if we come back to it later. It's already confusing, probably.
Okay.
So that's the way you calculate an unweighted GPA. What we just said, right? If it's an 87, okay, that falls in the plus category. 87, 89, that's a 3.3. If it's an 85, that's not a plus. It's a standard B. That's a 3.0. If it's an 81, that's a B minus. That's a 2.7. Add up all your courses, divide them, add up all those numbers, those 2 7s, 3 3s, blah, 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 divide by the number of courses, you get your overall GPA. However, most of the time you're going to give a weighted GPA. You are going to give bonus points for advanced classes. And what do you think is the most common scale used for weighting GPA, Nick? And this is the one that I would recommend that someone does, because most of the time you're not going to see all these detailed instructions on how to do this. If you're asked to report a GPA.
Je ne sais pas.
Oh, you went with the foreign language on me. Showing off your skills. Showing off your French. Okay, so the most standard is 0.5 for honors and 1.0 for IB or AP. So that same 3.3, that B plus, could become a 3.8 if it was honors, adding 0.5, or it could become a 4.3 if it was IB or AP. Did that make sense?
A little bit.
Yeah. No, a little bit's not good enough.
I mean, no, it makes sense, but it is a lot, and it goes back because I'm anxious to hear your answer to my question about why are they taking us through this?
Yeah, you're so fixated on that question. I'm going to answer that, but I do want people to understand this. I'll put a link, and I think it'll be easier because in the link, there's actually an example where it actually shows the grades like on a report card, and I think it'll be easier for people to visualize it. But this is the way that I would want you to do it. And sometimes the reason why this question is really important, Nico, overall, is because people get asked to have to report a GPA. It's really frustrating when students get asked, and like, where is it? I don't see it. So this ends up being a practical question. Now, let me ask your question. Let me, what did I say? Let me answer your question.
Your own foreign language.
See, your je ne sais pas threw me off. Let me answer your question. A lot of savvy schools won't report a GPA because they'll feel it's similar to ranking. They'll feel that it will allow a school to figure out a pecking order of where everybody is, and it'll pigeonhole kids in. And the more highly selective schools won't take a kid if they don't think that the GPA is high enough. Does that make sense or not?
Not really, because guess what? They still have to do it. So
So here's the thing. So did you understand when we talked about ranking why some schools don't rank on their transcript?
Right. Yeah, I do.
So that's no different why some schools don't offer a GPA. Because it'll be too easy for the school to figure out where you are in the class, and they'll automatically won't admit a kid because, this kid's like not even the top third. Okay. And so if you don't do that, this process is a lot of work. I just explained it. Because it's so much work, it forces the admissions counselor to have to read an application more holistically. They can't just pigeonhole you in, this is where you are. I don't need, you're kind of lower than I want to take, so I'm not even going to bother to read your essays and read your recommendations because I'm stereotyping you. In other words, they don't want kids to be seen through the prism of their GPA. They feel like it won't give the student a fair chance to have the other aspects of their application considered. Wow. Does that make sense?
Honestly, it still doesn't.
Really?
Because, and I'm gonna tell you why. Because if the school is asking for the GPA, you still have to.
What do you mean? What school? What school is asking for the GPA?
Because you're talking about the school. The high school doesn't want the child to be seen through whatever prism. However, if that particular college is saying,
the college is not saying the college is saying, show me the transcript. And if a school doesn't give the GPA, then the school is leaving it up to the college to read the transcript and make decisions. Sure, they're gonna know if they see lots of C's and D's, they're gonna know that's different than straight A's, obviously. But does that make sense now? Because I completely agree with it.
Okay, so for the listener now, let's take this in. So you're saying my child may or may not have to go through this process depending on what schools they're looking at.
Bingo, Anika. That is exactly what I'm saying. Your child may or may not have to go through this. Let me start with when you may have to report your GPA. On the Common App, there's an Education tab. And under the Education tab, there's a Grades tab. If a student is coming from a school that does calculate both a weighted and an unweighted GPA, then the student is going to need to report their GPA on the Common App, just like the school does. Now, the student has a choice of using either the weighted GPA or the unweighted. And I recommend that they use the weighted because it's going to be the higher one in almost every instance. The Common App will ask you, is it weighted or unweighted? And you just use the drop-down box and you select weighted. However, and this is what we've been talking about lately, if your school does not calculate a cumulative numerical GPA, or if it uses a GPA scale that is different than the options available in the Common App's drop-down menu, then you can leave the cumulative GPA field blank. Once again, this is a cumulative GPA, not a core. But once again, if your school does not calculate a cumulative numerical GPA, you can leave the field blank. This is not required in your application.
Gotcha. Okay, the light. I see the light. Gotcha.
Now it makes sense?
That was the answer.
Okay.
That was the answer I needed. Yep.
All right, good. Well, this is why it's important that you're here, Anika, because you think like a lot of parents. By the way, my Michigan State Spartans play tonight, and they better. Have you recovered from the Duke loss yet over there?
No, and I told Jalen about your remarks.
Which one? Especially where I called them puke?
Yes,
you tell him that one?
All of that.
He doesn't like me anymore.
He was going to send you an interesting message. You'll hear from him.
At least you've warned me.
I think it was more of, hey, Mr. Stucker, don't get comfy-wumpy over there. I think that's the message.
I'll wait until we win it all, then I'll talk trash. Okay, friends, my interview with Ann Jean is one of my favorite interviews I've ever done in this podcast. Ann is one of my former students, and she talks about initially she wanted to be an anthropologist, but then she shares how she figured out that was not the career for her. And then she talks about how she discovered what her right career path was and how she used a number of ways to figure out what that career path is. And she talks about the lessons she's learned from her own practical experience that she couldn't learn from a textbook. And the reason why this is one of my favorite interviews is because Ann just turned 22. And the things that she did from 18 to 22 are what are like the model textbook that I would love for all students out there to do to figure out whether or not they're on the right career path. So Ann also shares some really helpful resources that she recommends. So listen and enjoy an interview with my former student, Ann Jean of Georgia State University.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
I'm here with Ann Jean. She's one of my former students, and she's a senior at Georgia State University. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Ann.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so it's really exciting sort of how Ann ended up being with us today. I know it's a surprise to her. Do you want to kind of tell the story, Ann? Like, how'd I end up interviewing you?
I happened to have come across Dr. Shannon, and she told me to contact you, Mr. Stucker. And then after we had a phone conversation about my career path, you invited me to this podcast, and I was like, okay, sure, why not? I mean,
yeah. So let me fill in a few of the details. So, Ann reached out to me, kind of doing a little bit of career planning. What should I do now? Like, it's time for professional school, and Dr. Shannon said I'd be helpful to her, in terms of mapping out a plan for her. But in the course of talking to her, I was so impressed with all the things that she was already doing that I said, you know what, Ann? A lot of times students will listen to students more than they'll listen to us older folk. I would love for you to come on and talk about how to know you're on the right career path. So that's actually what we're going to talk about today, because I feel like Ann has taken pretty much textbook. I mean, as far as what I tell students to do to confirm that they're on the right career path. And I feel like it'd be better for them to hear from a young 20-something than a 30, 40, or 50, or 60, or 70-something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So let's start out by telling us about your background and your upbringing all the way up to your entrance in high school.
Okay. So I was born in Haiti, and I came to the United States around 5 years old. Prior to living in Georgia, I lived in California. I had a pretty normal elementary school, middle school life up until about like 7th grade, when I transferred to KIPP. And KIPP was definitely like a whole different world. There are a lot of high expectations to do well academically. If you were subpar as far as like your work ethic, that was like considered unfavorable. And I worked really, really hard at that school. Every time I made an A, I knew that I earned it, and it wasn't just something that was given. And then after I went to KIPP, I then transitioned to high school. And that transition for the first 2 years is pretty smooth. I took mostly honors and AP courses every semester until I graduated. And I think like the main difference between KIPP and high school was that in high school, there was less emphasis on individual students. And it was more about you being more accountable for yourself. Yeah. And then so high school went pretty well.
So let's back up. I don't want you to read. I'm gonna kind of want to go right into 9th grade, but I want to say something that I learned something, and I didn't know you lived in California.
Oh, yeah.
What was that from age when to when?
From like, I think 9. From age 5 to 9.
5 to 9. Oh, cool. Where in California?
Santa Monica.
Nice. So, and let's go back to when you first started high school. Talk to me about what you were thinking about for your career, and share with our listeners how you figured out that was not your path anymore.
Okay, yeah. So originally I wanted to be a linguistic anthropologist. I was really into just languages and people and how people interacted in their different languages. And I took AP Human Geography, and I did not like that course, at all. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I can just push through this and make it work. I just didn't like it. It just wasn't working for me. I did well in the course, but by the end of it, I just decided that wasn't for me.
And let me say something there. So this is really important because, if you're going to do something the rest of your life, you got to love it. So you should love the material you're reading. You should love going to class, love the lectures. And if you're not, that's a good indication that you need to think about a different career. And the converse is also true. If you absolutely love the books you're reading, the content, lecturers, anything like that, field lessons, that's also an indication. So talk to us about your transition. So when you thought, okay, I need to have a different path, I want you to talk about some of the clubs you joined in high school and how did they help you to get on the path you're on today?
Yeah. So before I got into high school, I was part of this program called C5. And C5 was a leadership program, and it was geared around community service. So that was one thing. So I knew that I enjoyed helping people. And then I figured that what was the best way to help people. And I knew that healthcare was one way. And so I started exploring that. I joined this club called HOSA. And HOSA is for health professionals or future health professionals. I'm not too sure of the acronym. And then I started doing these competitions, and I took the class, and I learned a lot more about dentistry. Well, dentistry was my topic, and I thought that was just really, really cool. And so I was like, okay, well, this is something that's different that I haven't really thought about. And then I kind of just, from then on, dentistry was kind of in the back of my mind as a possibility of what I wanted to be. And it was definitely through HOSA that I came to that decision.
So let me stop there for a sec. So this is also important because a lot of parents are listening, a lot of college counselors are listening, and students are listening. I want you to see how important the clubs are that you join and how they can help confirm that you're on the right path and the right career trajectory.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
For our recommended resource for episode 63, I'm going to return to how to calculate a GPA, just like we discussed a few minutes ago. sharing an article entitled Updated Guide Weighted GPA Calculator. Now, this article appears on the Prep Scholar website, and it was written 3 weeks ago by Anna Wolek. And what the article does is it visually will allow you to see the method I spoke of earlier about how to generate your own GPA, your own weighted GPA. So earlier I spoke about one method that they refer to as the class-by-class method, meaning you list every single class by class, semester by semester for your entire time in high school. Here you take the sum of your weighted scores. Let's say you add up all the 3 3s and the 2 7s and the 3 O's and the 4 O's and the 2 O's, and you get 59.4. And let's say you've had 20 classes. Then you just divide the 59.4, the weighted scores, by the 20 classes, and in this case, you would have a 2.97 GPA. They also describe the sort by class method. For example, in this method, if a student had 10 regular classes, 5 honors classes, and 5 AP classes, instead of taking your grade for all 20 classes and adding up the numerical grade, the 2 7s and the 3 3s, for every class and then dividing them by the total classes, you just take a shortcut. And you take your 5 honors, you can multiply that by 0.5, and then your 5 APs, and you multiply that by a 4 full 1.0. So it's just a shortcut, but it does generate the exact same GPA. You can use whichever method you like better. And by now, I know you're utterly confused. But guess what? A picture is worth 1,000 words. And what's great about this article is it's all laid out for you there visually, even a full report card. And that's the way our brains work. So check it out. We'll include the link in the show notes. We will now return to my interview with Ann Jean about how to know if you are on the right career path. Talk to us about, anything else you did besides just joining HOSA that helped you in high school to know, I think this is what I want to do.
Okay, so aside from HOSA, I also did, I shadowed a bit. So I called my local dentist and I was like, hey, my name's Anne. You've probably seen me around the office. Can I come and shadow you? And at first he was kind of like, maybe not. But then I called again a couple of days later and he was like, yeah, sure, go ahead and come in. And so I started shadowing at his office during my winter breaks from high school. And then I also took a couple of classes.
Hold on, Anne, I got to stop because that was really deep. And I want people to catch that.
Okay.
Did you say your mom called your local dentist or did you say you did?
No, I did. I've always been the initiate. My parents were always encouraging me to do things, but it's always been, I have always initiated and took that step to call and figure out how do I get into this thing with this person. Even if they say no, I just call again and hopefully.
Well, that was the next thing I wanted to get to. So I when I'm working with students, I emphasize so much. You've got to be an initiator. Jobs aren't going to fall out of the sky.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Opportunities aren't going to fall out of the sky. You have to take the initiative. So here, not only are you taking, and what age are you at this time? What year are you in high school when you're doing this?
I'm a junior in high school.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're a junior and you're calling out. And not only did you do it, but what was it mentally? What was going on in your mind that made you think, well, just because they didn't say yes the first time, it doesn't mean they won't say yes the second time? Can you help bring us into your mental space there? Because I think so many people wouldn't take that initiative as a student, as a junior. But then not only to do it, but to there's a lot that would do it and say, I tried it, didn't work out, I'm done. Mm. So where did that come from? That's a hard question.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking about it. I honestly, I'm not too sure how to answer that. Mm-hmm. I just kind of felt I don't see why they wouldn't say yes in my mind. It's not. Okay. I didn't think I was intruding. And I felt like if I stated my case properly, maybe the first time they were kind of busy and they couldn't really schedule me in. So if I kind of stated my case, and they'd be more willing to see me. And another thing is if they, I actually did this in college. If speaking over your phone or email didn't work, it's really hard for somebody to say no to you in person. Wow. So I would just go to see them in person and just be like, hey, it's me again. Remember the space.
So let me tell you this, Anne, as someone who back a long time ago did 6 years of outside sales.
Oh.
If dentistry ever doesn't work for you, you can always become an outside sales rep, because that's what you have to do. You have to like show up, especially like medical sales, pharmaceutical sales, like show up, go in, meet, because it's so much harder to reject you face to face. So these are great lessons, and you're really, really being an example. Parents, college counselors, I want you to tell your students to listen to this interview, because this is what it takes to get ahead. So talk to me a little bit about that call, the second call. Like you said, what was your messaging? Like, tell me what you said when you called them. What did you say?
So I was like, hey, I actually don't remember the lady's name, but I think I'd say like, hey, Miss So-and-so, I called last week about potentially shadowing. You said that you'd see what you guys had, or was it that it wouldn't work out? But I wanted to call again to remind you that I was still interested. If you could tell Dr. Brian or somebody in the front office to give me a call back, I'd really appreciate that. I'm a pre-dental student or aspiring dentist, and I'm really interested in doing this just to see the field.
And of course, they also knew you happened to also be one of their patients.
Yeah, I was also one of their patients. So yeah, that too. So I was like, I'm also a patient.
Yeah, because you're basically leveraging your network, and that's how you get jobs. You leverage your network. I mean, it really, really is true. It's not what you know; it's who you know.
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah, I remember this conversation I had. Now, I'm dating myself because this is like more than 15 years ago, but it was with somebody from the University of Pennsylvania. I was to school in in Philadelphia, an Ivy League school in Philadelphia. And at that time, it cost $42,000 to go there. So that will tell you how long ago it is, because it's now like $75 cost of attendance.
Oh, wow.
But I was listening to the admission. I was talking to a bunch of students in like a little info session I had with him, and he was saying, "Why should you pay $42,000 to go to the University of Pennsylvania? Like, why should you do it? Like, why don't you just go to the University of Phoenix?" He listed all these other schools. You know how much money you could save? So he was really challenging the students. Like, you can learn biology there. You can learn it here. And then he said, you want to know why you do it? Because at the end of the day, you can pick up the phone and call one of your alumni friends, and they can introduce you into their network, and then you're in. In other words, his perspective, and not everybody would agree, but his perspective is the network that you build is so strong that it will open up doors for you. And that's basically what you're doing at a really young age, and you're already using the leverage. You're using the leverage of your network to get opportunities, and that's what I want the students to hear. Any thoughts?
Oh yeah, no, I definitely agree. This has kind of carried me through in college. A lot of the opportunities that I've gotten is because I've known somebody and they kind of know me, and I can kind of sort of bypass all of the requirements kind of, and I can get into that like program that I need to get into. It really is all about like who you know, especially with just like my internships and everything that I've done. It's really been like those people that I knew.
So, Anne, you have so many things, like your textbook of what I want students to do. So I don't want to jump ahead to college yet, because you did some more things in high school. So while you're shadowing, and talk about the shadowing, was this then it being 1 day, 2 days? I mean, a few hours here and there. Talk to us about the shadowing experience. What'd you actually do?
I stayed for about a week, because I think my break was around a week or two. So however long my break was, I was just there every day. I had to kind of get a feel. So my thing is, when I'm in a new situation, I don't really like to talk a lot initially. Like I kind of like to get like a feel for like the type of people, like the environment that I'm in, and like how much they talk. And if then I'll just like kind of like slowly introduce myself to everybody. And so I guess like initially people usually think I'm a very quiet person, which is not true. But yeah, so when I like shadowed, I would just like quietly follow the doctor, just to be like respectful to the patients, because there's a stranger and they have confidential medical information, and I'm just there taking notes. So I'd like quietly shadow, take notes, and then write questions in my notebook. And then like afterwards, I'd be like, "Oh, hey, Dr. So-and-so, with patient X, you did this. Why did you do this? I don't really understand that." And they're really like basic questions, because I was very new to dentistry. So there was a lot that I didn't know. And so I do things like that. I'd kind of follow them around. I'd come really, really early in the morning. So whenever they open, I'd come. And then as soon as they close, then I would leave. And I kind of like build connections with everybody in the office.
This is awesome. Yeah. So when you were doing this, are you thinking at the time, I can do this? Like, this is what I think I want to do for 40 years or whatever. Like, this is exciting me. Or were you not so sure about being a dentist? But how did the shadow experience, help confirm that this is something you thought you may want to do?
Well, while I was shadowing, I just thought that this was very interesting, and it was a lot more than I initially thought like dentistry was all about. Like there were a lot of sides that I didn't see. Like, you Google like dentistry, what do you do as a dentist? And it comes up with like a list of things, and you are actually seeing those things in practice. And then you think to yourself, like, can you do this? So that's basically what I did. Like I kind of went there and I was like, okay, I had this like image in my head of what dentistry was supposed to be. And then actually being there, I realized that, I could definitely do this. It would just take a lot of work and lots of school, but like it was something that I could do. It wasn't like outside of my scope of capabilities. Like I could definitely do it.
So let's get specific. So what's one thing that your Google research didn't tell you, but by shadowing you learned something? So give us at least one thing that you learned that you didn't know from internet research.
How important everybody in the office is. And I didn't understand that. So when you get the image of like a doctor, right, you think that is like the sole person who is making all of the decisions. And through shadowing, every single person in the office is important for just the office to function on a daily basis. Like the front office manager is important for like scheduling, important for payments. If that person isn't there, then your patients don't get scheduled properly. Then you can't do your job. The assistants are important. So their well-being is important. Treating them right is important, because if they're not doing well, like personally and emotionally, then it goes on to the patient, and then that reflects on you. So all of those things that I wouldn't have quite gotten from an internet search, I got that from shadowing. Those like people are so crucial to the office.
And that's such a great lesson, because you're already thinking ahead. Like when it comes to me having my own practice, building my own team, every one of these hires is pivotal. And the dental hygienist, everybody. So that's great. So now let's go back to high school. Talk about your coursework. Did you take any courses that also helped confirm that? Yeah, because there's certain courses you're going to have to study for dentistry. So talk about your high school courses and how you saw that lining up with your future career goals.
Okay, so I took AP Biology, Honors Anatomy, and Honors Microbiology. Those are the three main courses that were very related to dentistry. I also, at the time, I actually didn't realize this, but I was in the dual magnet program at my high school. So I took lots of art classes and lots of like 3D design. And at the time, I didn't really understand how important that was to recreating tooth structures. But I thought those classes were very helpful in confirming that.
That's amazing. So let's transition now. Let's just skip the whole college application process and talk to our what I call our listening family about some of the books you read that you feel helped prepare you mentally to go in and excel in college.
Okay, I have a lot. So
just go ahead and share them all, because I'm always advocating reading. It's one thing. No, it's one thing when I advocate reading. It's one thing. Why are you 21, Ann?
Yeah, I'm 22. I just turned 22.
Just turned 22. So one thing when a 22-year-old, and at that time you would have been 18. So so as an 18-year-old, when you talk about all the books you read, it's a whole lot different as far as if we're trying to inspire you to read. So go ahead, share them.
So I'm a big fan of Cal Newport. So he's written these books about how to succeed in college, being more focused at work. So one of the books is How to Win at College, How to Become a Straight A Student. Those were the two books by him. I also read 10 Steps to Earning Awesome Grades by Thomas Frank. The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Duhigg, Dunhig. The Professor's Guide to Getting Good Grades in College by Lynn F. Jacobs. So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport as well. And then I read I did some what are those called?
I don't know because I can't read your mind.
You know those? I'm trying to think of the name. The like prep books.
Okay.
Before you like go into a class, you kind of like when you're taking an AP class, you have like the study guide books.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I did one for chemistry and I did one for algebra because I hadn't taken chemistry since I was a sophomore and I was going in taking chemistry 1. And so I wanted to be very prepared for that. So I did that whole entire textbook that summer before I got in. And I also did algebra, which allowed me to skip pre-calculus and I went straight into Calc 1 my freshman year.
You know, and we do this recommended resource for the week that I do every week. And it was probably, I don't know, maybe 10 weeks or so ago, or it was a little while ago, we featured one of Cal Newport's book. It was about being a straight A student. So this is the second time that our listeners are hearing us advocate for that book. But tell us one thing from all your reading, or one or two things from all your reading that you took away and you applied and you said, you know what, I'm going to take this, I'm going to apply this, and I'm going to go to college and be a straight A student. Tell me what were one or two of your takeaways?
To never pull an all-nighter. So never wait till the last minute to do anything. And throughout the whole entire college career, I think I only pulled an all-nighter like maybe 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
And
guess what? You're better than me. I did 7 my first semester at Michigan State. I guess I should have read Cal Newport's book, but that was the 80s. No, because you know what? Because I was so perfectionistic about highlighting everything. Like I didn't learn till grad school like how to skim and read quickly. You know what I mean? I just had to write notes everywhere and highlight everything. And you do that like you're reading like 10 pages an hour, if that. So anyway, yeah, good stuff. Good.
Next week in the news, embattled colleges focus on an obvious fix, helping students graduate on time. And we'll be in chapter 64 of 171 answers. And we're talking about what admissions counselors look for in a school-specific essay. And next week's question asks about the new non-enrollment online options. And Mark will be in his final part of his interview with Ann Jean on how to know if you are on the right career path.
Anika, I'm going to be at the SACAT conference this week, which is exciting. Hundreds of admissions officers meeting with hundreds of college counselors and just like learning from each other. So I will probably not be available if you're trying to reach me on Sunday, Monday, but we'll circle back on Tuesday.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you found this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that could really use this information. Your College Bound Kid is produced by John Lockenbaugh. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. If you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on the show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions with an S at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.